The rain poured down relentlessly. Heavy, icy droplets lashed against Shirone, washing away the dirt and dried bloodstains on his tattered shirt. He lifted his empty eyes to the bleak night sky, letting the rain mingle with the tears streaming down his cheeks. His mind echoed with a single agonizing question, a feeling of utter bewilderment. Clay Marcia, why? Me? The question hung suspended in the torrential rain, unanswered. In the distance, atop the cliff overlooking the coastal village, a massive fire still raged, engulfing the house in darkness. The fiery glow cast shadows on the pitch-black clouds, creating a horrific scene, in stark contrast to the deathly silence of the village below.
Night fell, enveloping the dilapidated harbor. Outside the inn, a worn wooden sign reading Tavern swayed gently in the cold wind. Inside a small room, Giss lay on a simple bed, his breath heavy and ragged. Scars still marked his cheeks and chest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the nightmare tormenting his mind. Cold sweat poured out, soaking his tangled hair. He trembled, his whole body convulsing under the thin blanket. Hot tears began to stream from his tightly closed eyelids, and he gritted his teeth, a deep anguish etched on his youthful face. In the darkness of his subconscious, a silent scream erupted. Yuna! In the sudden nightmare, Giss felt as if he were drowning in icy water, his body drenched in sweat. A terrified scream finally escaped his chest, echoing in the still space. He gasped for breath, panicked. Without hesitation, he leaped out of bed. His bare feet hit the ground roughly, reopening an old wound on the sole of his foot, leaving a trail of blood on the cold wooden floor.
A horrifying realization shot down Giss's spine as he lay sprawled on the cold wooden floor. Pale moonlight streamed through the barred window, illuminating Marcia's imposing figure, hands on her hips, looking down with an air of superiority. In the darkness, her red eyes glowed eerily as she gazed at him with contempt. He stammered in his mind, fear constricting his chest. They are the real deal. They really are. Immediately after, an incredible force sent him flying backwards. Giss slammed his back against the floor, colliding with furniture and sending it crashing. The already messy room became even more chaotic, the floor now covered in dirty footprints. Hot tears welled up from the corners of his eyes, mingling with blood and dirt on his face. An image of his younger sister flashed through his mind, and Giss screamed in utter agony. Yuna! The desperate cry was like a stimulant, turning fear into impotent rage. Ignoring the pain racking his body, Giss rushed out the wide-open door, running into the dim night outside to find his sister.
Giss's face contorted in excruciating pain, tears mingling with blood streaming from the wound on his forehead. He gritted his teeth, a desperate, heart-wrenching scream erupting from his chest. Yuna! His cry was lost in the pouring rain, echoing through the dark, cold alleys of the city. Giss's small, solitary figure stood in the deserted street, the feeling of loss engulfing the bleak space. The nightmare wouldn't release Giss, even in his sleep. He thrashed on the bed, hot tears soaking his pillow. Yuna! The name escaped his trembling lips, choked with sobs. As dawn broke, the warm sunlight shone upon the coastal village, a plume of white morning smoke rising from the cliff, shattering the otherwise peaceful scene. Beneath the palm trees, the villagers silently gathered around the ashes of the house. Amidst the whispers, someone couldn't hide their astonishment. What happened? All of this in just one night?
In another setting, under a vibrant sunset sky, by a windswept beach, Elzine spoke, her voice deep and clear. Clay Marcia. Her hand tightened on the sword hilt, slowly drawing the blade from its sheath as she recounted the tale. 7 years ago, she single-handedly attacked the kingdom of Iran. She was the leader of a legendary mercenary group, one that nearly overthrew an entire nation. Pausing for a moment, Elzine raised her hand, skillfully gathering her golden hair, tying it into a neat ponytail. The sea breeze blew strands of soft hair, and in that moment, her eyes gleamed with steely determination. The sound of the blade scraping against the scabbard rang out with a sharp shick. Rian frowned, a hint of skepticism on his face. But didn't that invasion of the kingdom of Iran end in failure? So we don't need to fear her, right? Elzine only focused on tightening the hair tie, her green eyes narrowing with implication. Yes, the royal army arrived before the golden hour ended, but the timing was suspiciously perfect. The cord was tightened decisively, like an affirmation of her suspicion.
Amy's emerald cloak billowed in the wind as she spun around abruptly, her gaze bored into Elzine filled with suspicion. Timing? Yes, Elzine replied softly, her voice calm but betraying an undercurrent of tension. Amy clutched her cloak tightly, her voice turning somber. It seems the parrot mercenaries were exploited in the Civil War. Meanwhile, Shirone donned the characteristic robes of a mage and stood silently in the desolate, dust-blown landscape, a complex expression on her face as she looked down at the parched earth. Elzine approached, her expression equally grave. Immediately after the mercenaries attacked the lower house of the Iron Kingdom, a member of the upper house appeared with the royal army as if they had been waiting. A bloody image of betrayed and slaughtered mercenaries flashed through their minds. Amy continued her analysis, her voice turning cold as she grasped the cruel truth. According to my father, the mercenaries were actually hired by that very member of the upper house. So, they were just pawns? The whole thing was orchestrated by that member of the upper house?
In the orange-gold light of twilight, Elzine explained with a serious expression, perhaps it's to consolidate their political position. We don't know if it's true, but Rian, standing beside her, frowned in confusion. Politics are so complicated. Not far away, Shirone stood silently by his horse. He looked towards the horizon, then suddenly tightened the reins in his hand, a fierce determination blazing within him. He declared resolutely, "We're going to stop them." Then Shirone turned, his clear blue eyes full of resolve, looking directly at his companions. "Everyone ready?" "Ready," Rian replied curtly, his eyes gleaming with resolve. Elzine and Amy, their faces resolute, also silently affirmed their agreement. Without another word, the four of them urged their horses forward in unison. The steeds neighed and reared, their hoofs galloping, kicking up clouds of sand on the beach. The group sped off like an arrow, the pounding of hoofs echoing across the long stretch of sand, blending with the whispering of the sea as they advanced together.
As the dawn broke, Shirone spurred his horse into a gallop, a cloud of dust billowing behind him. His face was set, his blue eyes gleaming with unwavering determination. Close behind him, Rian, Amy, and Elzine were also giving their all, the group hurtling forward like an arrow piercing the air. They raced across the fields, heading straight for the coastline shimmering under the early morning sun. The scenery was magnificent, but only a steely promise echoed in Shirone's heart. "Wait for me, I'm coming to find you myself." The group galloped along the wet sand where the white-crested waves crashed relentlessly. Meanwhile, somewhere overlooking the coast, a slender hand with a fingerless glove rested lightly on a window frame. Marcia smirked, her voice laced with amusement and disdain. "These little brats are bold indeed, daring to come directly to me?" Behind her, within the eerie red gaze of her eyes, were Palkoa, the brutal leader, and the girl, Yuna, held hostage. A mysterious smile bloomed on Marcia's lips, full of confidence and challenge.
In the darkness, Marcia's haunting voice echoed, laced with a cold challenge. "Let's see what your underlings can do." Provoked, Palkoa could only grit his teeth, cold sweat beading on his tense forehead. The leaves rustled in the wind as the scene shifted to a trail winding through a dense forest. Under the fading light of dusk, Rian and Elzine led a group of people on horseback forward. Suddenly, Elzine turned to Rian and asked an unexpected question. "Hey Rian, have you ever cut anything down?" Rian was slightly perplexed by the abrupt question. "What do you mean?" Elzine looked straight ahead, her golden hair flowing in the wind as they continued to move. "I mean, a person," she explained. "I used to go with my father to suppress bandits." Hearing this, Rian asked in surprise, "You have?" Elzine glanced at him, her gaze unwavering. "You haven't, have you?" Her question left Rian speechless. He turned away, avoiding Elzine's gaze, and his voice lowered as he confessed, "I haven't." His amber eyes became pensive, lost in deep thought. "I haven't thought too much about my sword."
"All right," Elzine whispered, a confident smile flickering across her lips as she urged her horse into a gallop. "That's enough." Suddenly, her ears twitched, all her senses sharpened, listening to the unusual rustling breaking the silence of the forest. Sensing danger, Elzine yanked on the reins, her green eyes flashing sharply. "They're here!" she shouted as a warning. Instantly, from the dense foliage above, a barrage of dark figures descended like predators. Blades flashed in the dim light as the robbers in dark clothing quickly formed a tight encirclement. Perched on a high branch, one of the robbers looked down at them with disdain, a sneering grin twisting his lips. Just 4 brats. However, his arrogant smile froze on his face before it could even fade. His eyes widened, filled with utter horror as he witnessed an unbelievable sight. Another accomplice could only manage a panicked, "Huh?" his face turning pale with fear.
A terrifying explosion ripped through the silence of the forest. Flames erupted violently, engulfing the space and tossing the bewildered bandits into the air like broken puppets. The intense heat scorched the surrounding trees, and the bandits' desperate screams echoed among the towering trunks. Amidst the chaotic inferno, Amy Carmis stood firm, her red hair billowing like a living torch. Her emerald eyes now sparked with a powerful light, cold and unwavering. Magical flames still danced around her hands, a testament to the destructive force that had just been unleashed. Stunned by the sudden attack, the remaining bandits stared at her with utter terror. A mage," one stammered, his voice cracking with fear. Another, recognizing the nature of the magic, screamed in desperation, "It's a targeted attack! Get out of the way!" But the warning came too late. Just as the horror of the fire hadn't yet subsided, a blinding ray of light, as thin as a thread, suddenly tore through the sky and plunged straight into the forest, signaling an even more terrifying attack about to fall.
The same moment, Shirone unleashed a photon spell. A violent explosion of light magic erupted, blasting away earth and stones in its path. Witnessing their leader's defeat, one of the remaining bandits knelt down, exclaiming in horror, The leader!" Seizing the opportunity while the enemy was still stunned, Elzine acted without hesitation. She rushed forward, the blade in her hand glowing with a golden aura, and with a swift and powerful strike, she felled another bandit. But immediately afterward, a sense of unease washed over her. Elzine quickly looked toward Rian. She shouted loudly, her cry tearing through the silent space of the forest. "Rian!"
From afar, Elzine exclaimed worriedly, "This is bad. Without schema, Rian will be at a great disadvantage in a speed battle." Below, in the dense forest, Rian braced himself, his hands gripping the massive greatsword tightly, preparing to defend. Facing him, one of the cloaked bandits was charging at an incredible speed. The bandit smirked contemptuously, thinking to himself, "What an idiot! Who brings a greatsword into the forest?" He passed by Rian like a gust of wind, leaving behind a blur and a cloud of dust. Overwhelmed in an instant, Rian gritted his teeth, pouring all his strength into his muscles to turn around. The heavy, cumbersome greatsword dragged along the ground with a deafening clang as he tried to swing it, but all it struck was air.
A deafening crash echoed as Rian's greatsword struck, cleaving deep into the ancient tree, sending bark and splinters flying through the air. Suddenly, a dark figure descended from the canopy. The bandit, grinning maliciously, clung to a branch. "Ha ha! Planning to chop some wood?" Seeing Rian in danger, Elzine cried out in alarm, "Rian!" She immediately drew her sword and charged forward like an arrow. Hearing the taunt and Elzine's scream, Rian gritted his teeth, his sweat-soaked face contorted with rage. Veins bulged on his temples, his eyes blazing with hatred. He roared with power, "Don't underestimate lumberjacking!" Instantly, a golden energy, like thunder, enveloped the greatsword. The surrounding air thickened and then shattered in a deafening explosion as Rian poured all his might into the blow, creating a blinding flash of light.
In the midst of the chaos, a brilliant streak of golden light flashed, tearing through the air. Rian swung his weapon with terrifying force, the strike not only shattering the tree but also causing the ground beneath to crack. The robber stood stunned, his eyes wide with horror. He only had time to feel a sharp shock before his body collapsed. "Huh? Am I dead?" That was the last thought that flashed through his mind as consciousness gradually faded into darkness. From the edge of the forest, Elzine froze, witnessing the entire scene. She tightened her grip on her sword hilt, her green eyes wide with astonishment, unable to believe what had just happened. Rian stood there, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his forehead as he gasped for breath. His gaze was unwavering, containing a ruthlessness Elzine had never seen. "I've never laid a hand on another person," he said, his voice deep and resolute. "But the version of myself that gave up because of a lack of talent, that version I've killed 10,000 times over."
The memory of that old promise suddenly flooded Rian's mind. He had gripped Shirone's shoulders tightly, his golden eyes burning with determination. "You absolutely have to become a mage, and I will become the strongest knight, becoming your sword and shield." That vow still echoed, a motivation, a goal he had never forgotten. Returning to reality, the atmosphere of the battlefield was as taut as a bowstring. Sweat dotted his temples. Rian tightened his grip on the handle of his greatsword, feeling the familiar weight. His gaze was unwavering, directed straight at the enemy. "Because never once," he muttered, his voice deep and powerful, "have I picked up this sword lightly." Standing not far away, Elzine watched Rian's steadfast back. A gentle and utterly trusting smile bloomed on her lips. "All right," she responded softly, her voice full of resolve. Meanwhile, on top of a nearby fortress, the bandits were frantically observing the battlefield through telescopes. Through the lenses, they saw an unbelievable sight. One bandit screamed in horror, his voice cracking. "No way! Our scouting party was defeated by that group of rookies, and by just 2 mages too?"
From their vantage point above, one of Marcia's robbers roared in frustration and disbelief, sweat beading on his temples. "They're a lot stronger than we thought." The accomplice beside him, squinting through binoculars, gritted his teeth. "Don't let their age fool you." However, another, with a cunning look on his face, cracked a sinister smile. He didn't seem fazed at all, but rather amused. His fingers fiddled with a strange device resembling a remote detonator, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. In a deep, husky voice, full of confidence, he said, "They've got some skills, all right. Well then, let's show them something more interesting."